Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report, and Happy New Year and Jubilee Day according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. That's right, Wednesday, March 19th is an important date, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, we're going to break it all down. Before we welcome our guest, if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you know when we post a new video. We are almost at 50,000 subscribers, and we really want to reach that milestone. So help us out, share this video around, tell people to subscribe. All that stuff would be great. All right, with that out of the way, let's welcome to the show our very good friend, Dr. Ken Johnson. Ken, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this is an exciting time because this for a lot of people really is a once in a lifetime kind of day
Yeah.
and an event, and it has to do with something that's called the Dead Sea Scroll calendars, which many of my regular subscribers probably know about. But when I go in my analytics, I find out on YouTube about half of the people watching are subscribers, and then half are not subscribed. So we get a lot of new people. So, for those who may not be familiar with this, can you give us a rundown of what the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is and what sets it apart from other calendars?
Okay. Well, basically, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is a calendar system talked about in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we have our biblical calendar, like Nisan 14 is Passover and all that stuff. Same exact calendar, only according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's a solar calendar, not a lunar one. And what would happen, according to their prophecies, is that eventually Israel would switch to a lunar calendar, which is what they have now. Josephus, the church fathers, and a lot of other people mention the Essenes as being 100% accurate prophets. They have commentaries on the minor prophets, major prophets, and prophecies themselves, like when the Messiah would come, when he would die for our sins, things like that. So it's something very, very important, I think, that we look at. So if we take that as face value, basically their concept is we have 6,000 years of human history and then a millennial reign. Same thing as what we have in the Bible, in Revelation. And the important parts are when you get to the last Jubilee period or 50-year period of each age. Basically, an age is 2,000 years, so there's three of them in our history. And they're talking about from the time of creation of the heavens and the earth to the creation of the new heavens and new earth is supposed to be 7,000 years. Their dates seem to be accurate. The prophecies seem to be very accurate. And so the idea is that in the last Jubilee period, you're going to have most of the prophecies we've been looking for fulfilled. And 2025 is the Jubilee year for the next to the last Jubilee. And so then after this, we have a 50-year period when most of those prophecies would be fulfilled. We've already seen the prophecies from the minor prophets start to be fulfilled. The takeover of the Gaza Strip permanently by Israel, and the expansion into Lebanon, and the wars beginning with Iran. So those are mentioned in a lot of different Dead Sea Scrolls. But it's really interesting to see this whole 50-year period start. What's neat about it is you have these prophecies of each time Jubilee starts, that's the last one of an age. You've got a lot of prophecies that start, usually a major revival, a lot of good things as far as Gentile nations start in a Jubilee year. And then, and we already see that. We see basically Trump kind of taking over, redoing everything, not just for the United States, but if he's successful, most of the Western world will be greatly benefited by this, getting rid of globalists and things like that for a while. So it's just really interesting that all those things begin to take place.
Yeah, for sure. And, something that I know I got confused about this, and a lot of people have, is the difference between a Jubilee year and a Jubilee. And when I first started in this research, that tripped me up a little bit too, because I thought, okay, 2025 is the beginning of the next Jubilee, but it's not exactly the next Jubilee. It's the Jubilee year, and then 2026 would be. So can you explain the difference between like a Jubilee year and a Jubilee, where we're at and where we're headed?
Sure, according to the calendar, you have a year. Years always start the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. So just figure spring equinox, spring, beginning of spring. for the year. A group of 7 years is a Shemitah, and 7 Shemitahs is plus 1 year is a Jubilee period. It would be like us having 10 decades in a century. They would have 7 Shemitahs in a Jubilee, 2 Jubilees in a century, that kind of thing. And it's the same pattern. You have a 7 year pattern, which is the Shemitah. At the end of that, you have a Shemitah year, which is the last year of a set of 7, where special things happen. Debts are forgiven between Israelis, for instance. At the end of a Jubilee period, which is a 50-year period, you have a Jubilee year, and that is a time of debt being forgiven between Israelis, Gentiles, and a lot of other things happening. So yeah, it is a little confusing. I noticed in the scrolls they call a 50-year period an Ulma and a
Oh,
Jubilee year a Jubilee. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But they still call a Shemitah year the last year of a Shemitah cycle. So
oh, that is interesting because that sounds really similar to a 500-year period, which is called an Ona, right? So a 50-year
mhm.
period is called an Oma with an M.
Ona with an N, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, how did ancient Jews observe the Jubilee year? What did they do on that day? The Jubilee year, not necessarily the 50-year Jubilee, but what we're in now, which is now the Jubilee year. How did ancient Jews observe the Jubilee year? What did they do on that day? And what would be the best way for Christians today to appreciate or even celebrate this day?
Basically, to look forward for what's going on, there's a great time to start witnessing if you're not already, for Christians. Basically, as far as the things that are go on there, for each one of these, like for a Shemitah year, a Jubilee year, and all the festivals, they have rituals. Most of us understand the Passover ritual very clearly shows the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah, who is the middle piece of the matzah in the matzah tov, representing a trinity. So you can see the God manifesting in the flesh, dying for our sins, giving us redemption, and a lot of other things in the ritual if you just know Christian doctrine and you just look at the ritual. And we have a little bit of that from the Damascus covenant on the Pentecost ritual, which is pretty amazing. But for all the others, we really don't have anything written. There's some things written in the Talmud. They're not really super explicit. And at the same time, we don't know if they've changed or anything. So what we really need is somebody to find the other Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, that would have all that detail in them.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we'll get some of those soon. I've heard you mention in one of your recent videos, because you recently did a video on the Jubilee year and everything. And I watched that with my kids. We watched the whole thing, the Q&A, all 2 hours of it. It was great. And in that video, you mentioned, and by the way, for the audience, go check out Dr. Ken Johnson on YouTube and check out that video. It's awesome. But I heard you mention in that video that 11Q13, one of these scrolls, says that the Jubilees are prophetic. Can you explain that scroll and what it says?
Yeah, that's probably my favorite Dead Sea Scroll.
Yeah.
It very clearly says that the Messiah is the Melchizedekian priest as opposed to a Levitical priest, and you see that in Hebrews chapters like 7 to 10. But basically, it talks about the Messiah being God incarnate, coming to pay the penalty for our sin nature, and that event happening one Shemitah after the end of the ninth Jubilee of their Ona, which, if you translate that into a Gregorian calendar, is 32 AD. So they had the date right, the person right, the event right. It's pretty amazing. And there's a lot of other stuff in there too. There's even stuff talking about later on there'd be something like a rapture. But anyway, it's a really amazing scroll. But one of the things it says about it starts talking about the Jubilee and other things, the fact that a Jubilee is symbolic of other things. So the whole idea of every 50 years, all debts being forgiven points to the Messiah. It's symbolic of what the Messiah would do when he comes. And it very specifically says it's not talking about money, but it's the debt of our iniquity. So he pays for our sin and our iniquity. And it's just like the ritual of the law of Moses that is about when if you accidentally kill someone, manslaughter, you go to a city of refuge. If
Mhm.
you look real specific about that law, It's you go there and you await until the time that the death of the high priest, who was the official high priest at the time you committed the offense, and then you're allowed to go free. Well, if you think about it, that's not exactly fair. Say Josh kills somebody 20 years ago and he's been hiding out in a city for 20 years. I kill somebody today, so I go to the city tonight. Now, tomorrow the high priest dies, so we both get to go free. You spent 20 years, I spent 1 day. So that doesn't seem very fair per se. So the point is, it's not a moral law, it is a prophecy. So what could that be teaching then if it's not just part of, evil people should be put to death, good people should be rewarded? And it's pretty obvious if you stop and think about it. We're all sinners of various kinds. Any sin is enough to send us to hell. We're all headed for hell when we're born because we inherit a sin nature. But when we have the death of our high priest, all sins are forgiven, period, instantly. And so all these things point to the Messiah. So it's really neat to see all those things and to see that's an example of it. One Dead Sea Scroll giving you several examples pointing back to Messiah.
And what an amazing thing to think about and appreciate and celebrate on this day. And that's a great example because that's how it is with salvation for us. There are people that like me. I was raised in the church, so of course I had my own personal time where I accepted Jesus and everything, as we all do. But I was raised in it, so I always knew it. But there are people that live their whole lives in sin, and then on their deathbed they confess and they get to go to heaven too. And and we can like celebrate that that's how forgiving our God is. And also you mentioned another way to celebrate this day is to look forward to what might come. So I got to ask you, do you personally expect anything prophetic to happen this Jubilee year from now until this time 2026? And if so, what do you think is going to happen? What are you thinking about?
Well, as far as me guessing, just knowing the scrolls, my guess would be nothing this year,
Mhm.
but a lot of stuff starting in 26 and going forward. But the interesting thing about it is apparently I'm totally wrong because well, for instance, there's one prophecy in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that gives us a date. It says that Israel would mess up by messing up a covenant. It doesn't say which covenant, but that gets fixed in a 70-year period. The 70-year period is very close to the time of the tribulation. That's what the
Mhm.
scroll says. It's actually a commentary on the uh, prophet Jeremiah, which
Mhm.
is pretty interesting. So your first thought is the 70-year prophecy that he's talking about, but it's really specific. And so the whole concept is they give away land. Once you take land that God has given you, once you've come back, you don't just give it back away. That's a breach of contract. And so when we look at this starting in 1948 and going forward, the first breach of contract was the Sinai War in 1956. And they took the Sinai and the Gaza Strip because of a war. Once it was over, they gave the entire thing back. That's a breach of contract because Gaza should belong to Israel. So 70 years later, it's supposed to be fixed. That's in 2026. And the Gaza war started in 23, actually. So basically 3 years early. And my first thought when I read this is like, it fits, but there's no way the war would go on for 3 years. It's like, well, apparently it's going on for 3 years. And then again, with Trump in office saying, we've tried this so many times, let's just move all the Gazans out and we'll be done with it. That's a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to take place, but the fact that he's talking about it, it's 25 now, and one more year, that's pretty interesting. So there's several things like that. And the prophecies talk about a lot of those things happening. One thing is really interesting, and I'll share this with you. Uh, Jesus talks about the budding of the fig tree.
Mhm.
And when you see the fig tree bud, the generation that sees these things will not perish until they see everything fulfilled. Well, what's really interesting is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word for generation and the word for jubilee is interchangeable.
Oh, wow.
So they do mean other things. I mean, a generation can be just whenever I was born to when my firstborn son is born. So 15 years to 50 years, who knows, or, much, much more, whenever I have my firstborn. So a generation means multiple things, but a Jubilee is a very specific 50-year period. And so what's interesting about that, everybody says, well, what is the budding of the fig tree? Is it Israel coming back in 1948? Is it them taking the temple in 67? Got to be one of the two. Well, we haven't actually seen it yet. And what's interesting, if you look at this, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the olive vine is Israel when they're messianic, which they are most of the time in history. When they're non-messianic, like they are now, they're called a fig tree.
Mm.
And so that's really interesting. So when Jesus came and they rejected him, he called them a fig tree. So in this case, you've got the budding of the fig tree we're talking about. So the planting of the fig tree was 1948. The growth of the fig tree when it took Israel, or it took Jerusalem rather, in the Temple Mount, was 1967. When something buds and then it drops its fruit, then it starts creating a forest. So you can see an expansion. So the expansion, if it starts with Gaza and fulfills Zephaniah and Obadiah and the other prophecies by taking Gaza permanently, southern Lebanon, and then Gilead, and then the expansion begins, that would be the budding of the fig tree. Now, if this is connected with that prophecy from the Dead Sea Scrolls of 26, it all begins in 2026. 2026 is the very first year of the last Jubilee, or we could say the very first year of the last generation.
That,
So if that happens, then that generation will not pass until everything is fulfilled.
no one gets into full-time ministry to make money. At least no one should. Given that, Daily Renegade accepts donations from those who care to help keep us going. Now, because Daily Renegade does not want to be told by the government what we can and can't say, we're not 501c3, so your donations are not tax deductible, but that's not why you're giving anyway, to get something back for yourself. Speaking of which, we here are never going to promise that if you donate, God will reward you with even more financial success. We're not about making promises for God here. But what I can promise is your donations are very much appreciated and help the continuation of everything we do here at Daily Renegade to reach the world with the truth of the Bible. Also, as many of you know, my son Nathan has had some very serious medical issues that we are treating with good, all natural and holistic remedies. But of course, those are very expensive and are not covered by insurance. So your donations help go towards his health care as well. If you can't afford to donate, you can always donate your time in prayer, which is far more valuable anyway. Let's be serious. So pray for our wisdom, pray for God's guidance for us, and that we never lose focus on what's really important, which is using Daily Renegade as a light of truth that the world so desperately needs right now, especially in these times. As always, thank you so much for your generosity, and I pray God blesses you greatly. That is so interesting and exciting. So after this Jubilee year, we're going to be entering the next Jubilee, the final Jubilee in March of 2026. Now, why
Right.
is this next Jubilee of 50 years so significant? And does it mirror anything from any other Jubilees from any other final Jubilees from any of the other ages?
Yeah, the scrolls teach that everything is cyclical. So in other words, the same kind of patterns happen. So at the end of each one of the ages, there's been three. The first age ended with a creation of an antichrist system with an antichrist person named Nimrod, with a false prophet named Nuki, and an entire tyrant system. And one guy, anointed of God, who's a type of Messiah, his name was Abraham, stood up and destroyed it. And this was at the end of the first age. So when we get to the end of the second age, you have a thoroughly corrupt system in Israel, and the Messiah and salvation comes, and the age of grace comes, and then the Romans come in and destroy it. At the end of this age, we're supposed to have a 7-year tribulation period, and the Messiah comes back and destroys it. One of the other things interesting in that, the very last, well, in the middle of the tribulation period, is supposed to be the Antichrist desecrating the temple, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the very last Shemitah of the age of Torah, we had the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And then at the very end, the last Shemitah of the age of creation with Abraham, you had the fall and the destruction of the Tower of Babel.
Mhm.
So that's just one example of not a direct prophecy, but a pattern. So at the end of every age, you see some sort of an antichrist type system, really bad system being destroyed.
Mm, that's so interesting, and this stuff is absolutely fascinating to me. We should make mention of the actual calendar that we have. Can you tell us about your website, dsscalendar.org, and about the print calendar that we put together?
Yeah, basically we have, when we finally figured out the calendar, and I did my research on it, but never could figure out the leap system. And then the guys at the University of Tel Aviv finally figured that out about 5 years ago. And so we created a website called dsscalendar.org. It's a PHP backend. So when you go to the calendar, it just takes your location and figures out how many hours from where you're at to Jerusalem, converts everything to Jerusalem time, and then takes the date of which you've visited it and just kind of builds the calendar. So you can go there, you can look at anything from 1900 to 2100. So to figure out the last 200 years, look up your birth date, other special things, and see if there's any patterns. And we have teachings on each one of the 14 Ona, or 500-year periods, according to the prophecies. And we've tried to put in most of the dates, like when Abraham was born, stuff like that, when Israel was recreated, so we can go back and see patterns. So it's an interesting thing. And again, the next week from when we're doing this is the Jubilee year, and my Bible study group always meets on Tuesdays. We just have for a long time. So we have on the Tekufas, like the New Year's and everything, we have a potluck because it's part of the Testament of, or actually the book of Jubilees. Noah commands all of us to observe those festivals. There's no rituals to be done. Basically, you're supposed to get together and see if anybody needs repentance, see if there's any prophecies recently fulfilled in the last 3 months, and then have a nice Thanksgiving type dinner, give thanks to the Lord and that kind of thing. And that's what we do. We also have, as part of that, Josh and I put together a print calendar. We're trying to find a way to make it a little less expensive, but nice wall calendar we can put up, so you can see the Gregorian calendar and the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and try to figure out the patterns along with us.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We've been doing that the past couple of years. People really enjoy those, and it's a great study tool. It's also a great gift. Just if you know somebody who loves prophecy, this is a great gift. But and you can pair it with Ken's books or my books. I've got a couple books on, and links to all of that is in the description below. If anybody wants to check that out. So do you think that we're going to find more scrolls soon that contain more prophecies?
Yes, actually, we know locations where there are things, probably scrolls. There are in Israel, but right now the safest place for them is to remain exactly where they are because there's a war going on.
Right.
Which is like there's always a war going on. But once this is cleared out and Judea and Samaria are declared to be Israeli territory, everything is disarmed, Gaza is not a problem anymore, then you're not going to have any question about who owns Dead Sea Scrolls, and everybody will be free to dig. Not everyone, but the Israelis will be free to very carefully dig and find things. So that's going on. We have Genizas in different places around the planet. In other words, a large place where you've got medieval manuscripts, one in Egypt, one in, at least one in Spain, one in Russia, and a few other places that are going through. For instance, the one in Egypt has approximately 40,000 manuscripts that they have
Mm.
not cataloged. They're going through carefully doing that. So when I wrote the book, Damascus Covenant, the New Covenant of Damascus, I had the Dead Sea Scroll, and you know how Dead Sea Scrolls are. There's holes everywhere. So you get through a couple of sentences, and it's like God said something to Moses, and there's a hole. So, but what was interesting is we found a medieval copy of the exact same manuscript in the Geniza, word perfect. So I was able to say, this word for sure means God said this to Moses. And so kind of filled the whole thing out. So those things are coming to light quite a bit. There's new dead scrolls coming to light every day. So a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, and that validates the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, because somebody might say, well, you know, if it's medieval, how do we know it wasn't faked? Well, because in medieval times they didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls, so they wouldn't have known where the holes are to fake them. So if there was
Right.
anything wrong, you would find it in stuff that they did right. So that's really fascinating. So for people doing the math, and I get this a lot, I'm sure you get this a lot too, the end of the final Jubilee. So if it starts in March of 2026, the end of the final Jubilee should be in 2076, and that gives a lot of people anxiety. Does that mean that we have to wait until 2076 for the rapture or the return of Jesus or anything like that?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. Possibly. I mean, the way that I would look at it is that it should be done at that point or before. And the thing that you need to look at to understand this is going back to the other two ages. So when God came to Abraham and gave him the covenant, the first time that he did this, he was 52 years old. It was exactly the year 2000 from creation. But the process, and by that time, 6 years prior to that, no, 4 years prior to that, the Tower of Babel incident had happened, and everyone had been scattered into their 70 languages. But what happened is they quickly formed translation schools and tried to pull everything, the empire, back together, which they weren't quite successful. It was pulled together into four pieces. And you see the four kings in Genesis 18, I believe. One of course, is Nimrod, Chedorlaomer, Arioch, and then Tidal, I believe. Anyway, the four guys. So they tried to come back and reform the empire, and that worked out good because Abraham and his people destroyed Chedorlaomer and his forces. The other two were somewhat godly nations after that part. And then it was basically 123 years after the end of the age that Nimrod was finally killed. The empire was completely broken up, and everything went back to normal. So a period of about 170 years around the year 2000. So if you come up to the end of the age of Torah, Jesus is born in 2 BC, more or less, but basically 2 BC. He's 33 and a half when he dies. The day of his death, start of the church, the day of Pentecost is all around 32 AD. About 40 years later, you got the destruction of the temple. Then 3 years later, you've got the shutdown of the Essene temple. And then a couple of years later is the actual end of the age, which has the Council of Yavne. But still, it wasn't over because then skirmishes happen. And then finally, in 135 AD, you have the Bar Kokhba rebellion and its destruction and the dissolution of Israel. So that whole process took approximately 138 years around that end. Now, I don't think that we could really go around it per se, like the second coming could be 20 or 30 or 40 years after the end, because if we have a finite system of 70 years, we have a millennial reign that can't really be pushed up or anything like that. However, it's very possible the Lord could come back, that we could have a 7-year tribulation period. The Lord could come back, fix everything, and then spend 10 or 20 years building the temple, in which case, when the temple is dedicated, that actually could be the year 2000. So it could be a lot of stuff, or the opposite. It could be 7 years and then the end of the age, which is the second coming of the Lord. But in either case, we know the season, we know the time period. And all of my friends want to say, well, I want to know the day. Well, how about the hour, second, and minute? It's like the way the Jubilee calendar works and the way the scrolls work is that they narrow it down to a 50-year period most of the time. And then sometimes, if you're really specific, they'll narrow it down to a Shemitah. Something happens in the middle of a Shemitah or toward the end of a Shemitah or something like that. And really, that's good enough. If I was going to say, well, the rapture happens on Passover of this year. Well, there's a debate on when you do the Dead Sea Scroll leap week. So is it this Tuesday or next Tuesday? Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't care. I know it's coming. It's in that range. Now it's not going to happen this year, but I'm just using that as an example. So it's really interesting to see all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And I've speculated too about how that final 50 years could play out because, like you said, one possibility. I mean, Jesus did come early in the final Jubilee of the Torah age, just a few years after it started. It's possible he could come back early, and like you said, it might take 20, 30 years. I mean, Herod's temple took 40 years, I think, to build. So, and a lot of people have this idea that when Jesus comes back, he's basically going to snap his fingers and everything's going to be different. The temple will be there. And I don't think it's going to really happen like that. I think people are going to have to build the temple. I don't think it's going to be me and you because we're going to be in glorified bodies. And when you read through the end of the book of Ezekiel, these are human beings that are participating in, unglorified human beings, those that survived the tribulation and populate the millennium, that are participating in the temple activities. So it makes sense to me, and I'm speculating, but it makes sense to me that it's probably going to be humans that build the temple, probably under the direction of Jesus and all that. But that could take a while, and then, like
Mhm.
you said, once that's done, the cleansing of the temple or the dedication or whatever could coincide with the very start of the millennium. Another possibility could be, because we have a rapture that we have no idea when that's going to happen. That could happen at any time. And one big misconception in Christianity, not so much in our circles because we're more prophecy focused, but just the church at large, who by and large really isn't focused on prophecy as much as we are. A lot of people think that the rapture is the thing that starts the tribulation, and it's not. It's
Right.
the covenant with the Antichrist, the covenant with many, with Israel and the Antichrist. So you could have the rapture happen really at any time. It could happen today, which would be great. And then you could
Hmm.
have years, and possibly even decades, before the tribulation actually starts, and all of this would fit perfectly well within that last 50 years. So do you think those are possible scenarios that could play out?
I think so. There's a lot of different things like that, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's going to be as far as like we're looking for the rapture.
Mhm.
So I don't think the rapture is going to be more than 50 years out,
Right.
55 or 60 or 70 or 100 or whatever. That would kind of mess up the, it's almost like us being raptured after the millennial reign starts, you know. So I doubt that very seriously. Unless of course our calendar's off, which is probably unlikely, being that it told us exactly when the Messiah came the first time. So that's neat to have a calendar system and then 11Q13 pinpoint one event that we know very, very well, you know, and give or take 2 or 3 years, because a lot of people say he died in 30 or 33 or 31, 32. This marks 32, but give or take a couple of years either way. Again, it's inside of a Shemitah, so that's cool. But yeah, there's a lot of possibilities on that. It could very easily be that the second coming is 2076, 7 years prior is the beginning of the tribulation period, and the rapture would still be sometime before.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, so and I always want to make sure to remind people of that because again, I get comments sometimes from people who misunderstand what I'm saying or what you're saying, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm in my 60s now. I'm not going to make it till 2076." I was really hoping to be able to see some stuff, and it's like, well, you still can because we don't know when the rapture is going to happen, and the Dead Sea Scrolls don't tell us, the calendar doesn't tell us. I want to make mention too that Ken said, this calendar is so accurate, and it is very unlikely that we got it like totally wrong because it matches. This is the calendar the Bible uses, and I've tested this myself. I know you have too. Everything from Genesis to Revelation, even prophetically, it uses this specific calendar. So you can go into Revelation, and I've done this, and I've written books on it, and I know you have too, where you can go and try to figure out like the day counts of like, well, the two witnesses have this amount of time in their ministry, and you can actually look at that. It doesn't give you an exact year, but you can actually look at that and actually see like during like what festival days happen and what occurs. And there's all a whole bunch of day counts, but they all match perfectly on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar than all the past stuff. Like For example, the flood of Noah, or everything with Moses on the mountain. It gives you all these specific day counts of what happened. And when you look at those on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, they fall on feast days and they fall on really important days. So it's so interesting to see that the Bible actually uses this calendar. And I don't. There's no other calendar that fits as well as that does. So that's really interesting. Well, but before we go, I want to. Where can people pick up your books, follow you online, and where can they watch your videos? You got three different things there. Give us all your links.
Okay. Well, BibleFacts.org, FACTS, not like a fax machine, is my website. And if you go there, it's got links for everything. But my books are for sale on Amazon. You can go to the website, click on it. It just takes you to an Amazon link. And then we broadcast live on YouTube on Monday nights with a live Q&A afterwards. That's how come we sometimes go a couple hours. But that's also linked on there. But you can also just look for Ken Johnson Bible Facts on YouTube, and that we should come up.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'll leave the last word for you before we close off. What do you want people most to take away from this conversation, from this day that we're in, for what's coming in the future? What do you want most for people to take away from this?
For Christians, people that are already believers, I would say I would like you to pay attention to the scrolls, look at the prophecies that they give, the extra biblical ones, put them all together, understand that they don't contradict, they complement each other very well, so that we can understand what's coming, some of the good things and the bad. We can use those to begin to witness, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And for the Jewish people out there that are not Christian, not believers in the Messiah, when you look at the rabbis telling you Christianity's junk, don't pay any attention to it. And then you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, which teach basic Christian doctrine. The Messiah did come in 32 AD. He did die for your sins. You can be reconciled to God, and he wants you in the family. And to see all these other prophecies like Gaza and everything at the right dates actually taking place. Israel being prophesied to come back, not just sometime, but in 1948, for instance. Those things are not coincidences, not all of them. They can't be. So God loves you and wants you to accept the Messiah. So pay very close attention to what your great grandfathers told you and not the medieval rabbis. Take a look at it for yourself. Don't go to a Catholic church or a Christian church, but just pick up the scrolls, pick up the Hebrew New Testament stuff. Just take a look at it. Decide for yourself. The Messianic movement is growing as prophesied by Paul in Romans chapter 11, and we live in some very exciting times.
Amen. I absolutely agree with all of that. Thank you so much for joining us again, Ken. We're going to have you back on again sometime soon. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us on this episode of the Sharpening Report. Until next time, love you all. Take care and God bless. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So if you're a renegade as well, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. You'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.